Okay, here we go. So I want to welcome everyone to the February meeting of the D1 Cowcatcher Division. We've got a lot of good things, exciting things to be talking about today, so we'll just get right on started. Our clinic today is Livestock Shipping by Steve Sandifer, MMR. He will be joining us via Zoom in about 45 minutes to an hour. I want to welcome a special guest, Lee Ramsey. Is he here? Is Lee here yet? Okay, well, I guess I can't welcome him right now. Lee is the individual who won the Pay It Forward module at the Plano Train Show a couple weeks ago. And he had told Russell Gifford that he'd be here today, so he may just have a little trouble finding the place.
You've been here before. 35 is the parking lot.
Okay.
Down from his end of the Metroplex.
Okay, so he may be here later.
Yeah.
Do we have any other guests or new members here today? Any other guests or new members? No, Chris, you don't count.
Yeah, I'm Tom Greco from over on the Dallas side of Division 3.
Welcome, Tom. Good to have you. And Thomas is from Division 3 too, and welcome, Thomas.
Robert Seacrest is from Division 3.
Oh, I didn't. And Mal Noonan is from Division 3. Very good. Welcome, guys. Glad you could make it.
Better donuts.
And coffee, right? It's the donuts and coffee, always the food. So before we go any further, I'd like to thank Texas Western for letting us use their facility. And David Crumpton's not here today, but Daryl, do you have any announcements or anything?
We want to welcome you, and we're glad everybody came today. We appreciate you coming to see us again. And
There it is. Test. We want to welcome everybody for coming to the Texas Western today. It's always nice to have visitors in the club. We appreciate that. Couple of things though. We've got in case you haven't noticed, the little bit larger scale than we normally deal with here over by the wall. We had a former member. His name was Ben Benda. I don't know how many people may know Ben. Ben was steam shop engineer over the people that overhauled 2248 Puffy. So he's pretty familiar with steam engines. Ben built this 1.6 inch scale Shay from a book by Kozo Hideka. And the book on Kozo was built in a 3/4 inch. So Ben scaled it all up and built this. It is in operating condition. We've got a drive shaft that we broke moving it, so we were getting that machined. But other than that, it's steamable and running. Once we get it all done, then we'll probably put it up for sale. But we're just kind of admiring it at the moment. But again, we want to thank everybody for coming today and appreciate it.
put a crack in the parking lot.
Yeah.
That's been mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daryl.
More than one.
Okay, so now we have we still have some unfinished business from last month's meeting. If you recall, we had some standard class tickets for the Durango and Silverton Railroad. Oh, before we start on that, Lee is here now. Hey, Lee, welcome. I know, I'm waiting. You're the one who spoke up. Lee, welcome to the meeting. So there's our special guest. Thanks for coming. Congratulations on winning the module. There's seats up here, there's refreshments in the back. And we'll cover it this time. Okay, so as I was saying, we got some unfinished business from last month's meeting. We want to raffle off 2 standard class tickets to the Durango and Silverton Railroad. This is a $265, it's a package worth $265. And we're selling raffle tickets $5 each, or 6 for $25. Has everyone purchased their raffle tickets who wants it? Anybody else want to buy some tickets? Okay. No more takers. Okay, Harold? What? Okay, you got him? Can you come up here? Let's draw a winning ticket. Why don't you have Mr. Packard pull a winning ticket? Jim, why don't you pull a ticket? Why don't you have Jim pull a ticket?
Sure.
Were you putting yours on top?
I didn't, no conflict of interest, I didn't buy any. There you go. Jared.
Oh, jeez. Way to go, Jared.
I assume I'm the only one that got tickets?
You're the only one who got tickets.
All right.
That's yours, Jared.
Yes, the one I just filled out like 30 minutes ago. Yeah, okay.
You can pay me after the meeting.
All right. Thank
There you go.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you to our host, whoever donated.
I have some money that someone
Okay, that's fine.
give you late, that's right.
That's fine. Okay, so now I want to welcome the members that are attending via Zoom. Who do we have on our?
Alright, get that going.
We got no members?
You got a few. Donna? Are you seeing?
I'm not seeing anything on the.
Let's see.
Welcome, Donna.
See what's- There's a new setting in here that's goofing me up for views. Basically, Donna or Dwayne Richardson, Don Hummel.
So you
And
have to have a D named after you.
Robert Mangrum
Think you could have stayed
and
home.
Trey Meister.
Okay, welcome, guys.
That's all the Davids.
Welcome, everyone attending by Zoom. Okay, what Chris Mahan, Chris, you want to update the members on the Pay It Forward module?
Thank you. We, as I said in the meeting a couple times last year, we put together a project called the First and Third Division called Pay It Forward. And it was our goal to interest people who aren't currently in the hobby and give them an opportunity to have a layout. With the help of Russ Gifford and Tom and a couple others, we were able to put it together. Unfortunately, a week before the show, I came down with COVID. So I was not able to be there, and I appreciate Russ and the others stepping up and making it happen. Lee, would you like, again, stand up?
James can stand up. He's technically the one who wanted, I just
Yeah.
filled it out.
Okay.
He has better handwriting than me.
Okay, this is our winner. And we're hoping to do the project again next January. In fact, at the end of this meeting, we're going to have a meeting to talk with the committee, or put the committee together again and start planning for next, the January show. I right now would like to present to the division. Their money that they upfronted us for the tables. And Donna, I'm sure you're listening. The money for the third division will be forwarded to you guys, and we appreciate you believing in us and helping us to get started with this project. We've had a lot of interest, and I think as time goes on, we'll have a lot more interest. And we're hoping that the Plano Shell will use this as a major advertising effort to say, hey, you know, if you just don't come and look, you could win a layout. Okay, so here I'm.
Chris, how much money did what were the raffle sales?
The raffle sales were $415. The tickets were $5 a piece. And we raised $415. So we have a little bit of money to start next year with and to pay back the two divisions.
Okay. Hey, David, would you mind getting that envelope from him?
Do I have to get up?
I think so.
Has anybody got any questions about the Pay It Forward project?
Good job, Chris.
Way to go, Chris. Yes, sir.
I'd like to, having been at the booth the whole show, I'd like to say that it generated a lot of interest. A lot of people stopped by the MRA booth to see what was going on and wanted to know about it. And the idea of winning a layout was really positive.
Well, that's good to hear.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
We got great feedback from that, from a lot of different people on that. And that's something that we want to continue in the future. Okay, so now moving on. Donna, do you have, you're going to update everybody on the results of the Texas Express National Convention?
Yes, I am. Can everybody hear me?
How about a little louder volume?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. The reason I'm here is to give the first check to Division 1 from our profits from the convention. Joe?
Here.
If I may, this is the result of the people that worked on the convention committee, those that volunteered for the convention, and all those that supported the convention by attending. So thank you to everybody. You did this for the Cowcatcher division. Thank you very much.
Okay, so as everybody can see, the first check is for $20,756.25. And the reason I say the first check,
I'm gonna go cash it.
yeah, right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
See you now.
Okay, the reason I say the first check is we have another possible check coming. In the very beginning, way back when, Mike discovered that there was a state of Texas event trust fund, and he has asked me to continue to look into it. So what I've done is continued to follow up with the state of Texas, gave them all the information they needed so that we were eligible to do this. We had to give them a local share, which was $18,000. When the convention was over, I spent several weeks putting everything together in the format that they wanted and sent them all kinds of bills that we paid. And the state is now in the process of whether they're going to approve any of that and reimburse us for any of that. I also have an email that guarantees that if they do not approve anything that I sent them, we still get our $18,000 back. So even if we don't get any of the other money, the Division One will still get another $6,000. So that would be the minimum on your second check. I also wanted to let you know that to date, we profited with about $65,000. We gave the 20% back to NMRA headquarters, which was a little over $13,000. We gave the region $7,800 or $9,800, and then both Division One and Division Three get the $20,000 first payment. So minimum, what the division will come out with is a little over $26,000. So I think everybody did a great job, and I thank everybody for that. That's it.
Anything else, Donna?
Not unless anybody has any questions. I'll be
Any
glad to
questions?
answer any questions.
It's amazing that you still have hair.
It's a wig.
Compares to other conventions like prior years?
Did you hear that, Donna?
No,
Question was, do we know how this compares to other conventions in prior years?
dollar wise, not with every convention, no. Up against St. Louis, quite a bit more. But no, they didn't, headquarters didn't give me any information on that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Donna, thank you very much. Obviously, this is a rather large sum of money. So I'm gonna appoint a couple of people to look into various ways of handling this money, whether we, put it in some kind of fund that would generate revenue that would feed the division, or we perform services with it or do other things. And I'll announce the committee next month, and we'll see what we're going to do with it. And we'll be soliciting input from the membership too. And after the committee decides what to do or present some alternatives, we'll put it up to the membership to vote. Okay? Okay, David Grind, Treasurer's Report.
Still talking about money.
Microphone.
Yeah, I know. Where is it?
This one right there, Dave.
I'll use this one. What's that?
How much dollars you can buy?
So imagine the donuts we could buy. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got you. All right, that's good. Can you hear me? All right, so this is January's Treasurer's Report. We had an opening balance of $2267. We had receipts of $1,549. Expenditures $176. Ending balance was $3,640. That receipt of $1,500 was mostly a reimbursement for expenses prior to the convention that were incurred by the division, and we got that money back. So that's a plus. That money, the $20,756, is already in our account. So
And when did it go in?
when did it go in? A week ago?
Early part of February?
Yeah, about a week ago. So, any questions? Good. We have money. Yay.
Okay, hey, Mike Mackey, any divisional AP announcements?
Everybody's working on different programs. Everything's looking good. Thank you for your continued participation. If I can help you with anything as far as AP is concerned, questions, answers, mentorship, anything like that, reach out. I'm here to help.
Okay, thank you. Now, just from a regional standpoint, we got a big convention coming up on February 15th through 17th at the Pasadena Convention Center. Is open. Registration is still open. The address or the website is turbotrains.com/2023 Lone Star. And remember, the convention includes 3 days of clinics, free access to the Greater Houston Train Show, layout tours, and a Saturday evening banquet, which they tell me is barbecue and should be really good. So I encourage everybody to go. How many people in the room are going? Let me see a show of hands. So we got a pretty good crowd. Okay, Joe, you got anything else you want to add?
Yeah, online registration actually is closed as of February 8th, but you are more than welcome to walk in and register for the convention. Registration will start, on-site registration will start at 6 p.m. on Thursday, February 15th. So look forward to seeing everybody there.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, Joe. Okay, so now awards and AP talk, Dwayne?
Yes, sir. Everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. We have nobody submitted any paperwork from D1 last month. I saw Chris was in the crowd. Sorry, I missed you again. Had some car trouble, and Mr. Palmer's wife is not feeling well, so I didn't have a ride over. I will get yours in the mail to you. We have a couple of others that have not been at the meetings the last couple of months, so I will get all of that in the mail probably Monday. But yeah, as Mike mentioned, we know we got a lot of people working on things. If you've got any questions, hit up Mike, hit up me, hit us both up, whichever works. And we'll be happy to help you out with whatever you're working on and offer some guidance and any mentorship you might need.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Anything else?
Nothing from the AP side.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now let's have we'll open it up for questions and answers. Oh, yeah, sorry, Eric.
Okay. I was going to tell everybody, okay, raise your hand if you have an email account. Okay? All right. Now, raise your hand if you have a Groups.io account. Are you getting our emails? Okay, except for Trapper, we know that one. Okay, so the other thing that I was wanting to tell everybody is that there is an app that Android and for iOS, iPhone, that will allow you, David, can you put up the little camera here? There's this Groups.io app that will allow you to log in from your phone onto Groups.io. Yeah, but that is the Groups.io. That's our current list of emails that are out there. So you can actually send and receive the topics and emails on your phone. And so
What's the app name?
it's Groups.io.
Groups.io.
Groups.io, yeah, I'm sorry. But will allow you to actually get in and, you can see all the messages or you can send messages. And this is since everybody has a phone pretty much, if you have a smartphone, this is a good way for us to communicate. Okay? Thanks, David.
David?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's very good. You got anything else?
Yeah, I've got one other thing. Daryl. This is more of a kind of a personal thank you to the Texas Western from the Plano Train Show. This is a Texas Western light box that I'm sorry Crumpton wasn't here, but I'd like to pass that off to you.
Thank you so much.
And it's got a remote and everything.
So that's a remote with it too?
Yeah.
Wow, pretty fancy.
Yeah.
I've got a TNP one in my office already that lights the space.
Yeah. Can you explain how y'all went about getting those made?
I make them.
Okay, you made those.
Yeah, and can I do a shameless plug?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I have about 25 of them out in the car.
Just happen to have.
Yeah, and
Just happen to have.
and I'm gonna take, normally I sell them based upon how many colors it takes to make them. But today, for anybody.
Today only, free shipping and all the colors you need,
Today,
right?
for anybody that's here, you may need to.
All right.
For anybody that's here, I'll sell them for $50 a piece because they go up higher than that with multiple colors. And so, and I have a catalog of 205 or so different logos. that- Anyway, so. Yeah, I mean, it's a shameless plug, I'm sorry.
Awesome, thank you, sir.
Okay, very good.
And they are licensed. Yeah.
Yeah, so you won't get, they're legal, is what he's saying.
They're authorized.
They're authorized.
Be put out for logos that are not a fallen flag.
Yes. Okay, so now let's move into the area where we help people that are, if people are having problems with their layout, we have they can ask questions in the room, you know, so if you've got an issue going on with your layout, with a building you're trying to do, anything like that, raise the question, and you got a room full of experts here that can help you. So who's having some issues? Steve?
I have a question. I have an American Flyer pole loader, and it has a special motor inside that is no good anymore. I need it-
Louder, Steve, or a microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I have this American Flyer coal loader. It's an old thing I had from when I was a kid. The motor needs to be rewound. I can't find anybody that can do it. Apparently, it can be done, but I can't find anybody that can do it. If anybody knows, and it's different than the motor that is in the locomotives, because it's a AC motor, and it goes forward and reverse, so it has a double winding inside. So I need to find somebody who could rewind that motor for me, if anybody knows who that might be.
Did you buy a new one?
Well, MTH makes one, but it's a completely different unit that goes inside. I'm trying to restore it to its original condition, because I messed it up when I was about 12 years old.
Steve,
So-
I know a company in New York that specializes in American Flyer and Lionel parts, and they may be able to give you a motor or sell you a motor for
Oh,
that.
well, yeah,
I'll
I've looked online, but I've been unsuccessful.
I'll give you that contact information later. I got to go home and get it, but
No
I'll
worries.
send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, how about any other questions? Problems? Everybody's layout's running perfectly? I cannot believe that. Jared?
I have a question. Okay, this is probably not going to get me anywhere. However, if anyone comes across one of the old, no longer made Walters blast furnace kits in HO scale that they don't make anymore, and you ever come across one that's less than like $500 or $600 on eBay, please let me know. I'm desperately looking for some, but can't justify paying that much right now. Just FYI, you can email, call, text, or send me something in Groups IO. And there you go. I check that every day. Thank you.
One thing to keep in mind is they reissue those like every 10 years.
Okay. I feel slightly better.
Okay, anybody else got any issues, questions, comments? So I know Mr. Packer's the only one that's got a layout that's working perfectly in this room. I know that. So come on, you guys. What other issues we got? Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. My layout is being built from a series of Fremo modules. I've got one completely bare module that is across the room from my existing module, which is powered by a DZS 50. I'm looking at using a power cab to power that module. Has anyone used a power cab to run a module? And did it work? Okay. Yes, sir.
Use a booster instead of a pull-up DCC system because they're going to be tied up to the other modules. So you're boosting it. You don't have a totally separate system over here.
At this point, it's going to be totally separate. It's going to be another year before I run the line on around, and I'll get back with
In that case, never mind.
Thanks.
I don't understand this question.
Well, ask him.
I don't understand that question.
Okay. I'm building a layout from a series of modules.
Right.
First module and 2 half modules is all being powered from a DCS 50, the little brother, not as smart, of those things that are back there on the programming tracks. I have one of the banjo-shaped power cabs.
Right.
And I'm looking at using that as a standalone power for this new module that I'm putting together.
Yeah, why, what's the problem?
Is that a problem?
Is
No.
the new module gonna be connected to the other module?
Yeah, is it gonna
Okay.
be connected? Exactly.
It's not going to be connected this year.
Well, in the future, if you connect it, it will be a problem. That's right now, if it's independent, no, it's not a problem.
Right. Size is one of the things that would matter, though. I mean,
That's-
power cast, you'll get, once you get pretty far away from your main connectors, you may have to put in a booster.
Okay.
I'm sure when you wire it in, you
But
do it
it's,
so
I
that you can
mean,
easily.
is it just one, but he said he's building a layout around it.
Yeah, at this point, I've got one side that has one module and a half module on each end. And on the other side, I have one that's just bench work at this point.
If I were you, I mean, you already have the power cabinet.
Okay, iPads.
I already have it.
Okay, so it will work for you. If I were you, I would get.
But there's nobody named Steve yet.
Okay. You can set the DD-150 up, be an independent command station. And then when you want to connect everything together, it becomes a booster, and it's compatible with your other equipment. And there won't be any problem connecting together.
Okay.
But, I mean, if you just want something to make the train run on the module in the interim. Okay.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I want you.
I've got a kind of a rudimentary question. I've got a structure with 7 surface mount LEDs. I'm wiring them in parallel, but each one has a resistor. Can I use a single resistor for all 7, or each one has to have its own resistor?
Every LED needs its own resistor.
Okay.
The answer is yes. You can do it both ways.
Okay.
However, the resistor value is different when you run one resistor versus 7 in parallel.
The value meaning the ohms or meaning the wattage?
Ohms.
The ohms. Okay.
shouldn't be an issue because it's so little. If you string them all together on one wire, eventually it uses up all the power and they go down.
Well, I'm wiring them in parallel, not in
Parallel,
series.
Each of them needs its own
Okay.
resistor.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've dealt with that, and if you have just one resistor, this one lights, that one lights, and this one, yeah. So you'll get limitations.
Thank you.
Eric?
I have one that is probably more for those people who have built cars that are the older cars. For the truss rods and the turnbuckles, how many people use wire? Or do you use like a thread that you put like CA on or something? And when you do those to get the shape, do you put it in a jig? Or do you freehand making those? Anybody?
Fishing line.
Fishing line?
Yeah,
Fishing line.
whatever you want.
Okay,
Fishing line, I get it really tight, if you go over the queen's boat,
yeah.
I just stretch it and pull it, and if you take your time with it, it'll work.
Okay, what about, are you on a wood base for the car? Okay, how are you attaching those to like, I mean, do you go through the bolster all the way to the end sills?
Yeah, you drill through and come back around and come back up again. You got four cables.
Right.
Yeah, I run 2 separate ones.
But you're using fishing line to do that?
Tie them up, and then pull it, come back through a drill hole back to the other side, and bring it back. pull it back through, tighten it, and they use a pair of forceps and get it good and tight, and then melt the ends of them off. And don't put it on top of the queen's post, so I'm running through because it's a stretch.
Yeah.
And then when I get it where I want it, then I'll pull it up on top of the queen's post and put a drop of CA on each top of each queen post.
Okay, what do you do about the turnbuckles? I mean, are you using two pieces of fishing line, one for each side with the turnbuckle, and you're meeting them up on the turnbuckle?
I got using one from Lavelle. They just like go around the line and you grip it down on the top of it.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Eric, for what it's worth, I think if I heard everything he said correctly, the one difference might be, depending on if I heard him or not, I tend to run mine in a very similar fashion, but I don't run them up and over the queen post. So I pull them somewhat taut, glue them in place after I've slipped a turnbuckle through it, run it down, run it through the hole, glue it in place, and I repeat that process. And then once all the glue is set up, I pick up the fishing line and lift it up and over onto the truss rod. I don't put any glue on the queen post at all. It always ends up being a glue blob. It always ends up counting against you. And when you run them first and then let tension hold it down, the shape is always perfect. It will hold itself in place and it won't be a problem.
What size fishing line?
Whatever fits through the turnbuckles you're using.
Okay.
The old Grant line, now San Juan, I believe it's a 10-pound test.
Thanks.
Okay, good. Anybody got anything else? Okay. Anything else? Okay, so let's, how about tips and tricks?
I got one for you.
Okay, fire away, Dwayne.
All right. Can you put my camera on the screen there, David? All right. Now let me switch the camera around. So I picked up a little tip from Mr. Cole Rash about using this super weld from JB Weld. It is a UV setting glue. So you put the glue on out of this tip here. I found that it's a pretty wide tip, so you want to put the glue on something else and then apply it to the model. And then this end has a UV light that you use to cure the glue. The longer you can get it around the joint and all the way around the joint, the better it tends to set up. But to give you an idea, I was wanting something that I could glue that buzzard onto the top of that water tank with and not worry about him coming off. But to give you an idea what a strong glue joint this is.
Wow.
And that's my contest model. So, that's some faith in a joint right there, right? But this stuff works really well. It will bond pretty much anything to anything. The UV setup just takes a few seconds, but it works really, really well. Thank you, Cole, for passing that one along.
So Cole, where do you buy that?
Home Depot.
Okay.
Over in the paint department, it's about $11 I think it's $11 for that. But it's made by JB Weld.
Battery operated?
Battery probably lasts.
Did you hear that, Dwayne? Is it battery operated?
Yeah, there's a battery already comes in it. So you just slide the switch and turn the light on. You run it around. I got mine when I was doing it probably somewhere about here and then ran it all the way around the joint, just, within maybe half an inch, something like that. And ran it at 360 around the joint as much as I could. Probably held it on there for 10 or 15 seconds, maybe.
What's the consistency of the glue?
It's pretty thin. It's not like it's a gel CA or anything like that. It's a pretty thin glue.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dwayne, the interesting about that is if it's UV activated glue, it seems like you could actually, this is, the resin 3D printers are UV activated also, and there's entire systems of UV light bathing this or that. You could actually glue your bottle together and put it inside your curing station for your 3D printer and set the whole thing up very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you probably could. You'd want it jigged up in such a way that it, wasn't falling apart on you, of course, because it doesn't hold anything until it cures. So.
Oh, it absolutely doesn't hold at all. Interesting.
Yeah.
You actually get UV LED pure box.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions for Dwayne on the UV adhesive?
Super weld or super?
It's JV, it's from JV Weld and it's called Super Weld. It's $6.94 on their website.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Dwayne. So how about show and tell? Anybody bring anything for show and tell today?
Well, I've got one of those too.
Okay, good.
If there's interest, I had a friend of mine hit me up about building a laser version of the old Atlas, this little shed thing here. He gave me some basic measurements and I drew this thing up. This could be a one meeting make and take. If there's interest in it, let us know. But it makes a nice little yard office or maybe a small little whistle stop type of depot. Either way. You can do them in whatever scale you want.
Definitely. So that's you did that out of you cut that on your laser?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Okay. Dwayne, thank you again.
You bet.
Okay, so anybody else on show and tell? Russell.
When we were at the last train show, Dwayne come and got me and goes, "Hey Russell, there's something you gotta go look at." You know, as I've got off, started doing more scratch builds. And the gentleman that was selling these Pat Harriman books. And what's in these books is full sets of blueprints for a multitude of kits to build. Eric's.
Hey, Russell, turn it around upside down. It's upside down on the screen.
That's just one example of what's in here. So if you're in scratch building, like I'm starting to get, these are priceless to me because there's all kinds of structures, churches, gas stations, multi-story buildings, you name it, are in these two books. So the reason I brought it up here, Eric asked me, if you may want to make some copies or take some pictures to work on your scratch builds, you're more than welcome to hit me up. I'll let you borrow the book, take a picture, do whatever you want to do with them. They're not a complex structures, but if you're working on the AP like I am on my structures, this was a gift. And once again, Dwayne, thanks very much for turning me on to this. And so if you're into scratch building, I don't know much about Harriman. I don't know much about the gentleman, but just looking at everything he's got in his books are just, the details are there.
Let's put the cover up just to.
Yeah, Pat Harriman was the former national AP chair before my father was. He was an architect by trade. He would sometimes feature an elevation or two out of these in the NMRA Monthly magazine, but he published these two books. Sadly, there won't be any more. Mr. Harriman passed away a few years ago, but these books are absolute gold. They're wonderful drawings. Most of them are actually in HO scale. There are some of them that are too big to fit on a page, so he gives you a scale ruler. So you have to do a little bit of math to get them up, but you can take these over to like Kinko's or a Office Max or somebody like that that's got a print center, and they can work on helping you get them up to where they're the right size you need. And most of the time, they'll only charge you for the final print. I've never had a problem with them wanting to charge me 7 or 8 prints worth to get it dialed in right. But again, those are really, really good books. They're very hard to find now. I knew Russell was working on some stuff, so when I saw those, I wanted to make sure I brought them to his attention. They are absolute gold.
Okay, Dwayne, after Russell sent me pictures of the front covers, I went out looking for them. Both are available at the Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine website. They're like $31.99 for the print version. Or you can, for like $20 right now on sale, you can get both books in a digital version for like $20.
Wow, I paid $100.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't know they had done that. That's something I'd be real curious to know if how they got the rights on that.
My books.
I just bought them.
Are
Yeah,
autographed.
mine aren't autographed. I just bought them off of the Model Railroad Hobbyist after he sent me the front cover pictures.
What time period are the structures?
They're all
Mostly older Western.
yeah, from 30s, 40s, 20s, to the 1800s. Here's some pictures of the structures that were built. I think Dwayne, you said your dad built the church.
Yeah, Dad built the church and I built the cabinet shop.
I don't know.
And then that building right there you see in the light blue, I actually have that structure sitting over here to my right. The neat part with these books too is, so there's the church that my dad built for him.
Can't see it.
Can you put it on the screen?
Lyle's built that other one.
Oh, look at model builder, Paul Richardson, MMR.
Anyway.
Yeah, mine's a couple of pages over. But one of the cool things about this book, at least the first book, he starts off with like a basic miner's cabin. And then there's a modification to it where they do an add-on. And then there's another version where they do another add-on. If you look at the cabinet shop there in the second book that I did, there's like 3 or 4 different variants of that building where it comes along and they add, onto it as the business grew kind of thing. So it's one of those things. It's a good way to cut your teeth on doing some scratch building. He gives you all the part numbers for any of they're all set up for Grant Line windows and doors. So you can order those through San Juan now. And he gives you all the part numbers and everything else. So it's a pretty quick process on what you need to build them and order your parts.
So anyway, I was going to charge y'all $20 a page, but since you can get your own book, Eric.
Thomas.
The Missouri Pacific Historical Society has a couple of books similar to that. The drawings of the line side structures. There's volume 1 and volume 2, and I think they're currently in print. Yeah, so if you're looking for not this, but something similar to it, the Missouri Pacific Historical Society has those too.
Yeah, most historical societies have stuff like that. I mean, my partner with the laser, he's from Cumberland, Maryland, so he's a big B&O guy. We have all their basic railroad structures for the B&O. I've got them for the DNRGW. Most of your railroads, if they've got a historical society, have probably got the basic drawings set up as a plan book. And one of the things, and we've talked about this before in these meetings, where you'll see one size of depot and it's slightly different from one town to the next, but overall it's the same depot. And they would literally pay the architect once, design it once, and then they would ship the materials to a site, and they might rearrange a window or a door location somewhere like that to better suit the needs of that town. But by and large, they're the same kind of things. So if you reach out to any of these historical societies, if you're a Katy modeler or a UP or Santa Fe or whatever, they've got these kinds of basic drawings already out there for you and all the dimensions and everything. So they can be rather easily scratch built and customized.
Okay, Dwayne, thank you very much. Anybody else for show and tell? Okay. So I got a couple other little announcements. First is I got a notice that Rapido is coming to discount model trains in March, Thursday the 21st, just an FYI. They're going to bring some new products and stuff like that. And the other thing is during the break that we're going to take, I have a bunch of probably 20 UP calendars for 2024. You're more than welcome to take what you want. Ken?
I believe they're gonna be there at 6 o'clock at night.
Okay, I heard 5 o'clock, but that's fine.
Pacific time, okay.
When are they gonna be there? March 21st. Okay, so it's about 10 to 11. Steve Sandifer, are you on the Zoom call now?
I am.
Okay, great. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and we'll start the presentation in the clinic right after that. If you're okay, so let's take a quick break and get back together about 11 o'clock. Back on now. Okay, we're starting the meeting. Cole, Chris, please sit down for the clinic. Steve, you there? Steve, are you with us?
I am with you.
Okay. Steve Sandifer is a longtime member of the LSR. He's a nationally recognized expert on the Santa Fe and has published numerous books. He is a ordained minister and is an expert on livestock shipping. So he's presenting our clinic today. Let's welcome him to the Division 1 meeting. Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is my screen sharing yet? Is my screen sharing?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes, sir. We see it.
Okay, very good. Trying to juggle all these screens is fun. Well, it's an honor to speak with you tonight or today about livestock operations. When I wrote my book on livestock operations, I chose to use the two words livestock instead of one word livestock for two reasons. The first is that Santa Fe did not use the combined word livestock until its annual report of 1953. Livestock also gains meaning when you compare it to another shipment, dead freight. Livestock are living creatures. The railroad's job was to transport them so that they arrived in the same condition as when they were loaded, just like passenger service. When livestock became dead freight, the railroad had failed. The shipment of animals began in the 1830s as the B&O used flat cars with stakes and slats to haul animals around. These open-top cars lasted until the 1860s. Falling cinders from the engines often landed on the back of livestock, and so a caregiver had to go with every car to brush the cinders off, keep from burning the animals. By the 1850s, combination cars had come into existence. Appearing somewhat like ventilated boxcars, these cars had extra vents in the sides and the ends, so they could haul products one way and cattle the other. These were all wood construction, many 28 feet long, Lincoln pin couplers, limited to slow speeds. You see dual brakes, usually dual brake stands on the roof. Even though this is a Santa Fe car, these were common on many railroads at that time. Western railroads generally did not exist prior to the 1860s. The first in Texas, 1853, was the Buffalo Bayou, Brazos, in Colorado, which began in Harrisburg, what is now the Port of Houston, and connected to the Brazos River at Richmond, and then was continued to the Colorado River at Alleytown near Columbus. It later became part of the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio Railroad, then the TN&O, then the SP Sunset route, and now it's UP. That was the first in Texas. It was 1869 when the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific joined at Promontory. However, passengers still had to cross the Missouri by boat at Omaha Council Bluffs. There wasn't a bridge yet. The Kansas Pacific began in 1855 and headed west from Kansas City. It made it to Denver in 1870, and then the UP under Jay Gould took it over a little later. Cyrus Holliday was the developer and arranged for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe It was incorporated in 1863. It would be 1868 before he began laying rail, and he had to reach Colorado in 5 years. Holiday shrewdly chose a path that would be south of the Union Pacific and the Kansas Pacific, primarily to intersect the cattle drives that would provide income. If he could intercept the cattle first, UP, KP lost out. We've heard of Abilene, Kansas, the big cattle town. But when the Kansas Pacific built there, it became a big city overnight as it intercepted the Chisholm Trail. This is a slightly exaggerated view of what it looked like. This was the real Abilene. What you've probably not heard is that Abilene only lasted as a cow town for 4 years, because 4 years later, the Santa Fe reached Florence and Newton, Kansas, 65 miles south, and Abilene became primarily a ghost town. Of course, many of the buildings in Abilene were really tents with a wooden front, so a lot of the people just packed up their tents and moved south and opened up again in Newton and in Florence. As the Santa Fe moved west, it caught more stock traffic at Dodge City, shipping 800,000 head in 1884. The famous cattle drives that we've watched on TV westerns largely existed during 20 years, between 1870, after the Civil War, and 1890. The soldiers were returning from war. Cattle had still been producing while the war was going on, and they hadn't been branded. And there were no fences at the time. Everything was open range. So the soldiers turned cowboys, rounded them up, branded them, and then took them north to railheads. Since the grass tended to be better the further north you went, the cows gained weight during the 2 or 3 months that it took for a drive to go to the railhead. 2 things stopped those drives in the 1890s. One was the invention of barbed wire. So the ranges weren't open anymore, and ranchers could contain their own brands. And second was the expansion of the railroads. Many railroads became closer to the ranches, and you didn't need to take them so far. Back to the combination cars. The idea was that merchandise produced in the East could be hauled to the West in these cars, and the livestock of the West could be shipped back to the meat-hungry people of the East. Combination cars and stock cars made up the majority of Santa Fe's fleet in the early days. I have not researched numbers on other railroads, but they were quite common. They were also popular as Zulu cars or immigrant cars. If a person was willing to immigrate to the West, the railroad would frequently give them free use of a car like this. And they would put their livestock, their milk cows, their goats, their sheep, all of their household belongings in a car like this, and the railroad would take it to a siding near the property they had just purchased. Prior to the 1900s, any place west of the Missouri River was sparsely populated. All of the lightest blue, which makes up half the country, was 0 to 2 people per square mile. If the railroad was to have any customers, they'd have to bring them out. They'd have to promote immigration. The railroads were seen as the key to the development of the West. Communities fought to be included on the railroad right-of-way, and they would give the railroad land for stations and railroad service facilities in order to be included. Places like Lubbock that thought, we're big guys here, we don't need to give the railroad anything, lost out its division point, for instance, to Little Slayton, south of Lubbock, where they wanted the railroad, and it was a key to a lot of branches that worked out of Slayton. The railroad had an advertising department. They were being given land in exchange for constructing miles of railroad. And so they wanted to sell that land to make a profit so they could build more railroad. And who were they going to sell stuff to if they didn't bring the people out to become consumers for the goods the railroad would bring and producers of the livestock and the grain and everything else that the railroad would haul away? So they produced brochures like this, talking about how wonderful the Garden of Eden was in the panhandle of Texas. But anyway, that's the way they did it. And if you look at the very bottom of this brochure, it's published from a German marketing person at the Santa Fe. A lot of this immigration took place from Europe. And so that's why you will look in various parts of the country and find communities that are of other ethnicities. If you go west out of Houston, you find big Czech communities, or German communities, or places that have Swiss names. Swiss Alps is a community, for instance. Of course, many of the advertisers lied. They would paint pictures of great snow-covered mountains in the middle of Texas and attract people there. And by the time they got there, they'd spent all their money to immigrate, had no money to return home, and so they had to take what they had and live on it. The Santa Fe maintained an agricultural department and a livestock department to research and teach best practices to landowners. They published an almanac. They published a monthly magazine entitled The Earth. And they ran demonstration trains to teach best practices for farming and ranching. The more products the new inhabitants produced, the more traffic for the railroad. Railway livestock operations continued at a very speed, peaking really in the 1920s. The Chicago stockyard was at one time the largest in the country. Here is the stockyard's list of bragging dates, the most dates. You'll notice the most cattle, and that's just cows. That's not calves, hogs, sheep, horses. Almost 50,000 in one day. The most rail cars at the bottom there, 3,228 rail cars in one day. The Chicago stockyards were about 1 square mile. How in the world they handled 3,200 stock cars in one day, I don't know. These were probably 28 foot, 24, 28, 26 foot cars, Lincoln and Penn cuppers on many of them. What a mess to handle in one day. But you'll notice all the dates here are in the mid-20s and down, because livestock shipping started declining. You'll notice 1934 here for calves. The reason for that was the Depression, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. These are rail car loads during the Depression, comparing Chicago, Kansas City, Omaha, Denver, Fort Worth, and St. Joe. Fort Worth, by the way, was really known for its horse traffic. It was a large dealer in horses. But you'll notice during the Depression, it really dropped off in 35. And that's because they were selling out in 32, 33, and 34. The Depression and the Dust Bowl meant that ranchers didn't have food to feed their animals. They didn't have food to feed themselves. And so the government stepped in, and the government purchased their herds so that they would have money to live on. The animals that were in the best condition were taken and slaughtered, and the food given to people who were hungry. And the animals in the poorest condition, well, they dug big trenches, frequently by the railroad tracks, ran the animals in there, shot them all, and covered them up. It was cheaper to kill and bury them than it was to feed them. And that's the way the government helped during that period of time. In the 20s, trucks were developed, as well as a proliferation of major stockyards and packing houses around the country. In the 30s, intercity highways were developed. Now, I'm not talking freeways here. I'm talking paved roads, even gravel roads between cities. You had a lot of paved cities, paved with brick. But to get from one town to another, you were frequently on gravel roads or at the beginning, asphalt. The Works Progress Administration, in order to provide jobs during the Depression, built 620,000 miles of roads between cities. In the 40s, highways connecting major areas were built. The war effort developed a lot of technology for big equipment, and that was applied to construction equipment to make things more efficient. It was in the 50s that the Federal Highway System for Defense was developed. We now know it as interstates as they began. President Eisenhower saw the need for quick transportation of troops in case of further conflict, and so better roads were being developed. All of this made it easier and faster for a rancher to take his herd to market by highway, and faster meant less damage to his livestock, less shrinkage as they were in trucks. Prior to World War II, virtually all livestock was raised on natural feeds like alfalfa, corn, hay, prairie grass. The concept of feedlots began really in the 50s. Meat packers began to build their plants in mid-America and contracted with local ranchers and established feedlots for their own, eliminating the need for major markets like Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Omaha. This also reduced the need for rail transportation of animals. After World War II, much of the meatpacking infrastructure was worn out. It needed replacement. At the same time, research had developed specialized feed for animals, which resulted in better stock that grew faster, speeding meat production. So this is where most beef today has its finishing step in these big stockyards, many around Amarillo, Lubbock, and West Texas. The flood of 1951 covered the bottoms of Kansas City, including the stockyard and adjacent meat packers. Instead of rebuilding their plants there, the meat packers built out near the livestock. And so the Kansas City stockyards never really recovered. The Chicago stockyards closed in 1971. National City, Illinois, location of St. Louis stockyards, no longer exists. Once it had 32 packing plants. Swift was the last to leave in 1986. When I say it doesn't exist anymore, what I mean is the name of the city, National City, was abolished in 1997, and all of this is gone. Possibly the last shipment of stock on the Santa Fe was on May the 26th, 1972, Peach Springs, Arizona. In 1973, the Santa Fe, Missouri Pacific, T&P, Fort Worth and Denver, SP, Juana Acme and Pacific, and Frisco all filed with the ICC to discontinue carload rates on livestock. It was granted February the 27th, 1974. Now, that doesn't mean it was the last shipment of livestock, but it was basically the ends in the early 70s, except for UP, SP, Northern Pacific, and Great Northern as well, built some very large stock cars, mainly for hog specials into Los Angeles to Farmer John's. There were also some privately owned and leased cars at a late date, largely because railroads didn't want to invest in stock cars anymore, And so specific packers leased cars, 2 or 3 or 4 for specific purposes. Our Canadian neighbors continued through the 1980s. This photo is from Appin, Ontario, November 29th, 1986. Canada is a big country, less densely populated, and so they use stock cars later than their southern neighbors. Anyone who models prior to 1960 should consider including livestock. If you model after that time, you could have stock pens in your scenery even though you're not running livestock, even if they're never used. This is Mendota, Texas, near Canadian on the Transcon 2019. Let's talk about the various animals. Horses. This is the Fort Worth stockyard. The shipment of horses and mules was very busy into the 1920s. Remember, horses were the source of horsepower for transportation, be it fire trucks, ambulances, mailmen, the private carriage, police. The sale of horses peaked during World War I. They were war horses, pulling cannons and carrying cavalry. The Chicago stockyards handled 205,000 horses in 1916. That's about 12,000 carloads. Fort Worth handled 115,000 horses and mules. Mules were significant too in 1917. With the coming of the car, the truck, horses became slowly recreational animals, though you can still find them in some places pulling plows. The horses in this picture are headed to Greece. European buyers bought a lot of horses during World War I. We'll talk about high dollar horses. Well, we don't talk about it in this, but high dollar horses like racehorses, polo ponies, frequently went in REA cars on passenger trains, not in cattle cars like or stock cars like commercial horses would. Cattle. I'm sorry, back to horses a minute. Don't forget, people ate horse meat. In 2012, 12 years ago, the U.S. was the third largest producer of horse meat in the world, with about 154 million pounds. 18% of the French population eats horse meat. It was popular during the 73-75 recession in this country because it cost about a third of what beef cost and tasted virtually identical. It's used in pet food. China today produces about half of the world's market of horse meat. Now, cattle. Each dot represents 5,000 head of cattle. And cattle is what we usually think of in Texas when we think of shipping livestock. Many animals were born on the plains in the West and in Mexico. Grass in those areas is kind of sparse, and so they require more acres per animal. When they were yearlings, they'd be rounded up, put on the rail, and taken to better grazing for the summer. Prior to the 50s, animals were fattened on natural grass, and some of the best grazing was in the tall prairie land grass in north of Ponca City and Pawhuska, Oklahoma, up to Manhattan, Kansas. Many others were in the Dakotas and Montana. A steer could gain 200 pounds during a 4-month stay in those areas. In the fall, then, they could be reloaded and taken to market. So a lot of cattle shipment was seasonal. Spring, going to the good grazing, fall, going to market. However, there were other reasons to ship cattle. During a drought, if there wasn't enough grass for the herd, you had to sell some or move them somewhere else. Possibly you had a mortgage payment due. And when all of your money is tied up in cattle, you have to sell a few head to pay the mortgage, or to send your daughter to college, or to buy a new car. A rancher might be expanding his herd and need new breeding stock. Possibly he's had an older herd and he needed new bloodlines mixed in. So he buys animals for breeding. Possibly he's had Angus and he wants to sell some and replace them with Herefords. Dairy cattle would cease to be useful for milking. They would need to be replaced with new stock. Cattle were shipped all year long, but the big cycle was April, May, and September, October. This picture's in Brownwood. Dairy cattle were sometimes moved in boxcars. They probably had to be milked in transit to keep them from having pain and to keep the milk flowing. But stock cars weren't as conducive to that. If you live in Central Texas, you think of sheep. San Angelo was the sheep capital of the U.S. at one time. The San Saba branch around Brady, Eden, Menard, San Saba, Big Lake handled more sheep than cattle, though both were common. I go into that area every year to operate on the Comanche and Indian Gap, and you will see sheep increasing in numbers out there right now. I asked Danny Click why the sheep were increasing in numbers, and he said the increasing Muslim population of the United States is put more demand out for lamb. Also, sheep breed twice a year, so they get double the sales out of sheep that they would out of cattle. Sheep require special attention because they are very dumb. When the Bible talks about us as being sheep, that is not a compliment. Sheep are very problematic. They wouldn't load easily because they wouldn't go up a ramp into a dark car without leadership. Once led, the instinct caused them to follow each other blindly. This is a double-deck car, and the lower deck goes up here and curves under and into the car. And you'll see some of the sheep aren't real happy about following the herd. The most common solution for loading sheep was a trained Judas goat. The goat would get in the pen, and on a whistle signal, he'd run into the car, and the sheep would blindly follow him. Then on another signal, when the car was loaded, the goat would come out, and the door was closed quickly. Give the goat a cigarette to eat, and he was satisfied. As a lamb led to a slaughter is dumb, yeah, that's the way they loaded them. I ran across an article in a Santa Fe magazine, their corporate magazine to their employees, that was announcing the retirement of a pair of goats at one of their feeding stations and honoring those goats for their long service to the railroad. When you went to unload those cars, by the way, the sheep would not get out of the car unless the pens they were going to were very well lit at night. So if you arrived in the dark and there were no lights, you could keep the sheep in the car until light before taking them out. If you live in Iowa, you think of hogs. Pork was the preferred meat in the U.S. prior to World War I. But hogs are very cantankerous to ship also. Hogs do not sweat, and they have no fur to keep them warm. So railroads had to be very careful with temperature control. In the summer, it was common to hang a block of ice in a burlap bag from the ceiling of the car as a sort of air conditioning. When stopped for feed, water, and rest, the hogs could be fed and watered in the car as long as there was sufficient space for them all to lie down. They were fed corn, usually. Major rail yards had long hog drenching stations where water could be sprayed on the car to keep its bedding wet and to cool down hot animals. In the winter, straw bedding was added around the slats, and sometimes the slats covered from the inside to keep the car warmer. When cold, hogs tended to bunch up together and lay on one another. And it wasn't unusual for the one on the bottom to be suffocated in the process. This brings us up to one of the rules, and there were lots of rules. Originally, animals could not be confined in a stock car for more than 28 hours. However, by the request of the shipper, that could be extended to 36 hours. Before that time expired, the animals had to be unloaded, watered, and fed, and provided 5 hours of rest. Feed, water, rest stations were provided by the railroad at most division points and often in between. At the feed, water, rest stations, the animals would be inspected for shipment damage like broken legs, goring, or even death. The bedding was inspected and renewed if necessary, and the car was inspected for broken slats or other damages that could hurt the animals. Generally, there was one pen at the feeding station for one deck of the car. So the animals that came in one car stayed together for the entire trip and were usually loaded back into the same car in which they arrived. So you want to ship some cattle. What do? You go down to the depot and meet with the agent. You tell him what you plan to do and submit a request for cars and give him the date you plan on loading. The agent then informs the livestock department and they plan the routing and quote a price. Once approved, the car loader finds the necessary cars. The Santa Fe had locations where they or a contractor shoveled out dirty cars and put in new bedding. Usually it was 2 to 3 inches of sand. That was the preferred bedding for the Santa Fe. A lot of people like to bed with hay. That was a special request, and it was not favored because hay gets very slippery and cattle can't stand in it well once it gets soiled. In some areas, the bedding was applied at the loading pens by the section gangs. And I have records of, for instance, on the Pawhuska branch, where they would request X number of air dump cars of sand to be unloaded at various stock pens along the line in anticipation of the shipments. In that case, the railroad would take air dump cars, dump them at the stock pens. They would then bring in empty stock cars, and the section gang would bed them a night or two before the loading were to take place. On the San Saba branch, the cars were cleaned and bedded at Lomita. There was a contractor at Lomita that did this. And then they were taken down to Menard to accumulate in anticipation of the call to load them. And when that came, then they would go down to Menard, pick up the empties, and stop along the way to load them before going back to Lomita. UP had this tractor at Ogden for loading sand in the bed of stock cars. Later on, Santa Fe contracted with a fella in San Angelo who had a front loader tractor like this and loaded their stock cars for them. The agent would fill out with his manual typewriter much of the paperwork in advance, but some things could not be concluded until the car was loaded. This photo was provided by Lowell Gage, who lives in Houston. He was the agent at San Saba as this loading was going on. This is on the Owens Ranch. Company photographer had his movie camera on the tripod, while the superintendent of the livestock department in Fort Worth used an early electric cattle prod to motivate the animals to get moving. The large man with his hands behind his back is Gordon Locke, conductor on this train, who now lives just north of Temple and is a source of all sorts of great stories from his days on the Santa Fe. The Owens Ranch had their own stock pens and 2 chutes. This one's for cattle, and the double-decker next to it was for sheep. The ranch hands were responsible for loading, not the railroad crew. Owens also bought a lot of cattle in Mexico, brought them to their ranch and unloaded them for a little fattening before shipping them on to Fort Worth. Probably the reason we have so much company attention in this picture is that Owens was also known for his barbecue that he put on at loading day. Another picture you can see on the far side over here, the sheep chute that was a double decker, and then the cattle chute here. When the cars were loaded or were ordered, this was quite a song and dance between the railroad and the shipper. If you ordered 10 cars, the railroad would ship 11 or would bring out 11. And the reason they'd bring 11 was they didn't want the cars to be overloaded, because if they were too full, animals would get hurt and the railroad would have to buy the hurt animals. So they would always bring an extra car so that if overloading was a problem, they could load it in that extra car, which they didn't charge for. Well, the ranchers knew that, and so the ranchers would always bring a few extra cows, knowing that they would get shipped for free. And it was pertaining to not the ranch, but the cattle owner. So if it was Owen's brothers, Owen number 1 would get an extra car, and Owen number 2 would get an extra car. And if some of them were going to their ranch in Montana for fattening, and some were going to their ranch in Dakotas for fattening, then they got 4 extra cars. So you can see the song and dance that went on, and the arguments between the railroad and the shipper over how many of these free cars are you going to get. Every animal was inspected by the railroad, and 2 people counted to make sure the numbers were correct. If 25 cows entered a car, they wanted 25 healthy cars to be unloaded on the other end. A miscount or a sick animal accepted by the railroad became a claim against them when it was unloaded. All the while, the agent was busy typing the remaining information on the contracts. When the agent was through, a copy went to the crew, a copy to the owner, and the rest went back to the depot. Stock cars were kept on the head end of the train to minimize damage from slack action. For our model operations, it's important to know if the car is full or empty. If it's empty, it can be anywhere. If it's full, it needs to be on the front end of the train. And for Santa Fe fans, this is interesting. This FT 102 was the only one I'm aware of that had 2 headlights of their freight diesels. This is in El Dorado, Kansas, October 1950. This is a map of their livestock feeding and rest stations. They had to provide these Harvey houses for cattle, if you want to call it that, so that the cattle never exceeded the time limit that was allowed. They had to be unloaded, fed, and watered. A trip from the Owens Ranch, which was, where am I? Down here. This is a San Saba branch. This would be Menard, this would be Eden, this would be Brady, and this line was pretty well in disuse by the late 40s. It formerly was a Frisco line. So they would get their cattle at the Owens Ranch, they would go over to Lomita, up to Brownwood, and up to the Fort Worth stockyards. And they could do that easily within their 36 hours. But if you were going all the way up to Kansas City, up here, you'd have to stop along the way. A lot of sheep stopped at Purcell. And Purcell was known for its sheep pens. And then they would be reloaded after 5 hours, usually it was the next day, and taken on into Kansas City. If the animals were delayed, and you had to unload them, feed, and water them to keep the law, then the shipper had to pay for the feed. And he didn't like that. And he would frequently file a claim because he wanted them to go all the way in one day. Also, if the price of the animals dropped at the auction house because during that delay, they would file a claim saying, because the railroad delayed, I got 20 cents less per hundredweight, and it's the railroad's fault, so pay me for that as well. Santa Fe's practice at feed-water rest stations was to send foreign road cars home and supply Santa Fe cars for the balance of the trip, if they were available. Santa Fe had a lot of cars, and so they could do this, and they could collect the money then for the use of their cars instead of the foreign road cars. Other roads which had fewer cars often did not change the cattle from one to another. This was the large feedlot at Morris, which is just outside of Kansas City. This was also used as a feedlot by the Santa Fe. Some feeding stations, like this one at Emporia, were enormous. They became feedlots as well. This photo was taken from on top of a grain elevator to take all the pictures. Of course, the grain elevator and the hay barn down here provided feed and custom mixes. All of these chutes and these chutes over here, double-sided, were for sheep unloading. These were sheep barns and sheep, goats, hogs. This was a mohair barn because they offered sheep shearing. Down here were the cattle barns and all the cattle chutes on both sides and horses. This was another hay barn. These cattle barns look very much like those at the Fort Worth Stockyard. And then there were also some open pens out here. So you can see this was a huge operation. When Delano was there during the 1940s, he reported there were 40,000 sheep in residence. Once the shipments terminated, the stock cars became just another empty car. It would be sent for cleaning, which usually involves shoveling and sweeping out, and inspection for any damages. If any board was broken or loose or bolt protruded into the car, it was repaired, and then they were ready for bedding and going again. Most of the colored photos we have of stock cars come from the 60s, when they were often surplus and not much attention was paid to their maintenance. But when they were widely in use, they were very well maintained, at least equivalent to any wood-sided car. The car distributor would determine where to send an empty car next, and they could be positioned anywhere in the train if they were empty. But you'll notice this car was last weighed in '57, and it's in very excellent shape. If you were a shipper, you would not accept any car that had a broken slat or anything like that that could damage your animals. This, by the way, is 1974. In the off-season, stock cars were used by maintenance of way gangs to haul track parts and ties and other company material. This one appears to be lined with plywood or cardboard. Here is a poor fella unloading green ties from a stock car.
Man.
I wouldn't want to do that all day. And notice how the ties are stacked so that all sides were available for air circulation as they dried out. In very busy grain season, they were lined and used to haul grain. Records show as many as 700 Santa Fe stock cars lined in the 1954 for grain service. They were also used to distribute grain doors to elevators. They served as ventilated boxcars to move tomatoes, cantaloupes, or melons. They were used for lumber and for brick. Prior to the mid-30s, the stock cars were used to haul coal, coke, and sugar beets. Some were converted to sugar beet service in the 1970s. The Milwaukee and other roads also had cars with dump mechanisms for easy unloading of coal and coke. These are flower bulbs. A stock car is simply a ventilated boxcar. Even ice. Now, there's special situations that need to be mentioned. Various diseases infected animals and restricted their movement. The Mexican tick fever is an example, and it prevented Texas cows from being shipped north of Oklahoma unless they had gone through a regimen of dipping prescribed by the U.S. government. In Texas, this resulted in many communities having two sets of stock pens, separated, clean pens and dirty pens, for animals that were dipped or non-dipped. It also restricted where the animals could be fed and watered and rested, as the presence of undipped cattle in a clean pen contaminated that pen, and that pen then had to have specially supervised inspections before it could be used for clean animals. There were federal rules for transporting and disinfecting the car and the pens involved in shipping dirty cattle. Notice that lower one there from Canada, Toronto. That's a Santa Fe stock car in the Toronto yards. They went a long way. Many railroads had system standards for stock yards, but I found that only the loading chutes and gates tended to be standard on the Santa Fe. Many of the pens were built by railroads that they purchased, and so the previous railroad had their own standards or no standards at all. I'm not sure I've ever found photos of a Santa Fe stock pen that was 100% system standard, except on model railroads. Also, the railroad might build only the chute on the railroad property. The rancher would build and maintain their own pens connected to the chute. The rancher might even build dipping vats and charge others to use them. Some frequently used pens would have company-owned scales attached. In other cases, they might be scales owned by a co-op or a private owner. Many pens had no scale, so the car would be weighed empty at the yard and weighed again once it was loaded. There are very few prototype pens left on the Santa Fe. The best ones I know of are Magdalena, New Mexico, and Bowring, Oklahoma. I have also found a couple of others in New Mexico that still stand. Santa Fe had the largest fleet of stock cars, with a peak of over 8,500 in 1940. Some railroads preferred 36-foot cars, and that was sort of their standard. Others liked 40-foot cars. I'm not going to go into cars in great detail because there were hundreds of designs, but I'm going to address some that were special. After World War II, steel became available for all steel boxcars, and these replaced many wood-sided boxcars. And so many railroads, not just the Santa Fe, rebuilt wood-sided boxcars as stock cars to replace their largely wooden predecessors. This is a Santa Fe SK3, which Westerfield has modeled, and it's built from a Santa Fe BX3 or BX6 boxcar. It's a 1966 photo. Stock cars generally ran from west to east with loads and returned empty. Early on, they used stock cars to bring coal back from the east. Some early cars had hinged slope sheets inside the car to make it easier to unload them. This car may be lined. It's on the coal tipple at Dodge City, Kansas, but it brought coal from the east to the west. This Milwaukee car, for which a model is available from Westerfield, had drop doors in the bottom. You can see the latches here and here on this car. Santa Fe had a lot of cars with Caswell drop doors at the bottom. And no, that is not the way you unload cattle. They also have hatches in the roof, and there were several different styles of these. But this allowed them to load them with coal and coke and bring them back west for the railroad's use. They also use these for sugar beets in service around Garden City, Kansas, and Holly, Colorado. Many of these cars were later rebuilt. The drop bottoms were either welded shut or removed and given wooden replacements. Some lasted into the 50s as built. And that is why I can display photos that look very different. These cars don't look the same, but they're both SKL Santa Fe cars. Various stages of rebuilding. Santa Fe and some other railroads had cars that were double deck, but they weren't fixed double deck, so they were called convertible cars, where the upper deck could be raised to transport large animals or lowered to handle smaller animals like sheep and hogs. New York Central and the TP had the same mechanism on some of its cars. This New York Central car is one that AHM modeled, but you see these chains and bars on the side, and this chain bar here, that was for lifting the upper deck so that they could load larger cars, larger animals in it. Come on, here we go. It had this chain bar. The chain was bolted to it and wrapped around it. And then this big ratchet could be turned by a long pole, and it would lift that upper deck. So the chain or a bar went up to two more chains. And then those two chains went up to a pulley in the roof. One went down to the upper deck on this side, one went across to the upper deck on the other side. Forget these light bulbs. Those were not there to begin with. They were added by a museum in Lubbock where this is located. But by turning the bar down at the bottom, the chain would pull this deck up. And then you can see these little dogs on the side here. Well, those were locks that would be swiveled out to support the deck when it was at the upper end. And when it was lowered to the bottom, the deck would rest on these beams here, also attached to a angle iron, and that would hold the weight when it was in the down position. That chain mechanism was purely for raising and lowering, not for supporting the weight of any animals. There were also some stock cars built for less than carload lot service. You'll notice this one has the large normal door, but it also has a small animal door on the side. And then if you look carefully, you'll see You'll see these attachments on the inside where an interior door could be fastened to it. So what they could do in LCL service on a branch line, for instance, is they could pick up Farmer Brown's bull and they could get Mrs. Brown's milk cow and put them in the same car. KCS had some cars like this, possibly other railroads. So here is that divider on the inside, and it had these latches that fit in the holes on the side, and then of course the door in the middle. So they could put different types of animals inside this car at the same time. Let's go back to that photo I showed from the 1950s, or from 1950. There's a lot of stock cars at the head end of this train, and most of them are not Santa Fe. This is at El Dorado, Kansas, headed toward Kansas City. These are probably Santa Fe cars here, based on the ID and the number placement. But these came from a variety of railroads, I'm assuming. And you'll notice the height variation. That's typical of any freight train. You'll see the cars are not all the same size. And I don't want all of my cars to be identical on my trains. For Santa Fe lovers, that is easy to do. Every one of these cars is a different class, a different appearance. And thanks to the resin manufacturers, you can do a lot of things with different cars. There are Westerfields here, there are Sunshines here, along with some Intermountains, and many of the Intermountains were kit bashed because the Intermountains are only accurate for 2 classes of cars at 2 points of time. They are not accurate for any of the double door cars or any of the double deck convertible cars. Of course, you have stock pins that you need, whether you are modeling current or older eras. And the Santa Fe System Standards book had all the descriptions of how these were built. So you can build those from strip wood. Also, you see the sand pile out here for bedding purposes. If you build your stock pin right on the aisle, which this one is, then this is all you have to build. You can let the viewer's imagination decide how big those stock pins really are. Somewhere you need to put a clean-out track and a bedding track. The only time I have seen this modeled well is on Dr. Michael Borken's giant UP layout in Kansas City. And this is his clean-out and bedding track. You need to designate whether a stock car is loaded or empty. You put your loaded stock cars next to the engine, and when switching, you don't switch with the stock car attached. You have to set it out, just like you would set out a combine. Because after all, you have live passengers in that car, and you don't want to break a leg or cause one to gore another, because if you do, you're going to pay for it. A pin should probably have just one chute. If there are multiple cars, you need a time rule for loading or unloading, like 1 real minute. The way they would do it on the prototype, if they had like 5 cars to load, is they would pull past the stock pins, and they would set the brakes on the last 2 cars, and then they would push them up to the chute. And by setting the brakes and pushing them, you didn't have any slack action to worry about. So you'd load the last car, and once it was loaded, then you'd close the door and push up to the next to the last car and load it. And when it was loaded, you'd close it, pull up to the next to the last car. And that way you kept the slack action out, and you loaded them 1 car at a time. So ask your operators to allow 1 full minute or some such for loading or unloading a car. When the car's in the yard, you don't bury it between other cars, especially box cars, because that gets rid of ventilation, and those cars need to be well ventilated. If it's going to be sitting in the yard for a length of time, or maybe till the next session, don't leave it there. Take it to the stock pen and unload it. You don't like sitting on a hot airplane with the pilot telling you you were 35th in line to take off. Well, cows don't like sitting in your yard for a length of time either. And if you model one specific railroad, you probably don't need more than 1 or 2 foreign road cars. The exception is if you model during World War II, when the government took over car distribution, and you found anybody's cars anywhere. I have stock records from San Bernardino, California, in 1944. And those records show about half of the cars are Santa Fe cars. Maybe a quarter of the cars are Southern Pacific cars. And the rest came from all over the country, including New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad in San Bernardino. But this is World War II. I also have records in the late 40s of Canadian National Car in Brady, Texas. So they did travel great distances. If you run a lot of livestock, consider adding a drover car for the cowboys who accompany the stock. This practice ended in the mid-40s, and most of the stockmen then depended on commission men at the other end to handle their livestock. And the drover cars were converted to other use. But prior to that, drovers frequently accompanied the livestock. Certainly the crew did not want them in the caboose. They were not known as being, they were known for being odoriferous, shall I say. Remember, stock cars can be used for other things than livestock. So you can load melons or tomatoes or lumber or company things like switch parts and use those in your stock cars. So there you have it. My book is still available. I have some copies, and the Santa Fe Society has copies. So glad to stop sharing now if I can figure out how to do so and see if I can answer any questions you might have.
How about anybody got any questions? Steve, thank you very much for a great presentation. It was very informative. Thank you again. Okay, so before we conclude, a couple other small announcements. As many of you know, Mike Mackey had a health episode a couple of weeks ago and spent some time in the hospital. So the division sent him some flowers, and he has sent a thank you note to the division thanking us for the flowers. And our meeting next month is with Ken Fitzgerald on railroad on horns of various locomotives. I'd like to see you all here. It'll be a very informative meeting, and thank you all for attending. Have a good rest of the day.